Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanisha Kumar, and I'm a junior from New Jersey. Today, I would like to talk about the research that I've done on the topic of chronic fatigue syndrome and how factors and a person's susceptibility to the disease can be determined from early checks and understanding the environment that someone lives in. So I was initially brought to this topic from seeing how misunderstood CFS really was by the general public from my base level research and general knowledge from the subject. And through my research, I hope to establish a precedent to detect chronic fatigue syndrome earlier in its onset and give warning signs for those who may be more susceptible to developing the disease. So my research specifically aims to explore these different factors that are possible causes for chronic fatigue syndrome in different patients. Chronic fatigue syndrome is also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, and it has been defined by the CDC as 6 months or more of constant fatigue, worsening of this fatigue after exertion that's either physical or emotional, unrefreshing sleep constantly, as well as impaired memory, decreased response to stress, and constant dizziness. This disease is very complex, as you can see, and it's often overlooked since these symptoms do overlap with certain symptoms such as fatigue and tiredness that are also observed in other long-term chronic illnesses, which makes diagnosing CFS extremely difficult. In many cases, the disease is also seen as imaginary. Despite its prevalence in today's world, chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS, was not commonly accepted as a real disease until more recent times, and it was really largely unknown as to why people develop this disease. Many people who find themselves suffering from CFS are constantly misdiagnosed because of either the complex nature or someone's unwillingness to really see the disease as its own entity that exists. Because of this, the etiology of CFS is multifactorial, and the purpose of my research is intended to find these early indicators of someone developing the chronic fatigue syndrome, and to also find a trend in how the syndrome is found within a certain population group. There's little to none real, solid evidence of this because the disease hasn't really been researched to that extent. No one really knows what causes it, and while there are some trends, they haven't really been closely studied before. So in my analysis, I took data from 3 different types of sources. I used the General Social Survey, which is conducted by the University of Chicago. I also used firsthand accounts from patients who have CFS and medical papers on the possible biological causes of the disease. For each source, I also used a different way of analysis. With the firsthand accounts and studies, I read through them and synthesized the information. And for the data from the General Social Survey, I created an algorithm that helped me find correlations between different socioeconomic factors, such as age, gender, occupation, and working conditions that someone lives through, which could possibly lead to the development of CFS in certain individuals. The algorithm that I made also aided me in kind of looking through this massive amount of data I had. The General Social Survey gets up to 50,000 responses, and there were quite a lot, at least 20,000 in the area of fatigue. So it was a lot of data and responses to look through. I used the algorithm to help me get my analysis started as efficiently as possible. And it also helped me in finding these trends with a lot of ease, rather than me having to look through all of the data one by one. I also use my algorithm to find connections and look at general points about the multitude of biomarkers that are also a part of chronic fatigue syndrome and how it appears, such as low cortisol and cytokine protein differences. So, looking at the pooled data and after analyzing my algorithm, I concluded that those who work longer hours are older and females tend to have higher susceptibility to developing CFS at some stage of their life, typically in their later years of life. Additionally, my other analyses found that individuals who were exposed to heavy viral loads often experienced extreme fatigue as a long-term side effect, with many developing symptoms of CFS. I also looked at some studies done by Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health and done by Stanford University, where I found that a protein known as interferon gamma that typically exists for adaptive immunity was found to be elevated in many patients with CFS, along with a decrease in cortisol levels, which it works in play with the decreased response to stress. These findings can be used to collectively understand that there are certain factors that play behind susceptibility of an individual to CFS, and that if we were to identify them, we would be able to implement certain remedial measures. So my question for the medical fraternity now is, how can we implement remedial measures to aid early detection, to make solid diagnoses, and to initiate treatment leading to increased productivity and a better quality of life for the individual? Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Tanisha. I'll open it up for questions. And I guess actually the first thing, so you ended with a question for the broader community. What's your answer?
So I think definitely one thing that we need to do is kind of see, like, we have these factors that we know could possibly play into almost maybe everyone having chronic fatigue syndrome. So one thing that we should do is really use them to detect who is at higher susceptibility and see is there something we can do to limit, like, for example, if it's decreased cortisol levels, could we correct them? And would that stop the person from developing chronic fatigue syndrome? Because if it does work, then it could be a possible, not necessarily a cure, but definitely a treatment for people who do have chronic fatigue syndrome.
Great. Mohammed, I see you have a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you so you can ask it.
Hi, Tanisha. I hope you're doing good. Hi. Greetings on your research. So I would question that, does the lower blood levels than the normal in any age, does it cause the CSF? Is that correct?
Could you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes, why not? Does the lower blood level than the normal blood level in the teenagers, does it is that directly proportional to the CFS, sorry?
So are you saying like blood levels like in general?
Yes, indeed. Like a lower blood level, can that trigger the CFS?
So it's not necessarily like the blood levels, right? So I feel like what you are trying to say is like, having lower cortisol, would it directly lead to CFS? And the answer to that is no, because you could have something else. As I was explaining before, symptoms of CFS can also be found in other diseases. Like you can recover from a long-term virus or long-term illness and have a sense of like long fatigue, but CFS itself isn't necessarily caused by having lower cortisol levels. It's just lower cortisol levels have been found in people who have CFS. So it's more of something that is found in the person, not really that it is 100% reason behind someone having CFS.
Okay, and the next question is that, does the pregnant women are more prone to the CFS due to the weakness, due to the iron deficiency during after the delivery?
Yeah, that could definitely be a reason why. As of right now, there isn't like a lot of studies done on whether pregnant women do develop CFS after, but if it fits into the symptoms, then it could definitely be a reason why. I think that would be definitely something interesting to look into for the future as well, because I feel like there aren't many studies done on whether pregnant women develop CFS after, and there's a lot of different things around like following pregnancy.
Okay, and the third question is that, does that mean also that the menstruating women are also prone to the CFS? Is that correct? Because they do have that general weaknesses like the pregnant women. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. So chronic fatigue syndrome would be like long-term fatigue. So it's not necessarily like having fatigue while menstruating. That would be just maybe for a week or depending on how long someone's menstrual cycle is. But chronic fatigue syndrome would be constant fatigue for over 6 months for like many years. So it wouldn't fit perfectly into the definition. So no, it would not be chronic fatigue.
Okay, and the last question is that, do you recommend some type of diet to avoid the CFS or the pre-symptoms for the CFS? If I let's assume that I have the pre-symptoms of the CFS, and so then based on that symptoms, which diet I should take and which should I avoid to get prevented from the CFS?
So I don't really think that diet plays that big a role in like chronic fatigue syndrome. It's more of a thing that's like biological things are not going as well, or from like your environmental factors are like overloading you. So probably sticking to having a healthy diet would aid in not having constant like tiredness or fatigue. So probably just eating healthy would definitely aid with some of those symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome.
And I put it in the last question is that, coming up to my mind. So the last question is that does the fluctuating sentiments or the mental emotions that do they affect the do they just make a man or women prone to the CFS?
So fluctuating emotions is more of like not necessarily like they cause CFS, but they can be a symptom of CFS because mental exhaustion is also a symptom of CFS. So definitely having like mental exhaustion and some sense of you're not the same as you were, you can't control your emotions the same, that definitely does fit into CFS. So more as a symptom kind of that you may have it is just being not having that same control over your emotions.
Okay, thank you. That is all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Two additional questions that came in the chat. What are the typical tests that are conducted to diagnose CFS? And then how long do these diagnoses typically take?
So right now there isn't like any type of like blood work test or anything that's done to find CFS. It's more of having like a conversation with your doctor and they talk through and see whether you fit the symptoms, which I discussed before is you have constant fatigue for 6 months, you have dizziness, you have post-exertional malaise, so you feel really tired after doing even a little bit of exertion, which you didn't have before certain event or before a certain time. So kind of doctors will examine how you were in that period before something happened and now you're experiencing this, or to see just have you been having these symptoms for a long period of time, because the main like threshold that you need is like at least 6 months of this fatigue. So they'll see how you've been doing for at least a period of 6 months, and based on that they'll make their decision. There really isn't like one singular test that is done to find chronic fatigue syndrome.
Great. Any final questions? Thank you so much, Tanisha.
Thank you.